Okay, so you want to know about McCauley, right? Like, is it actually as dangerous as everybody said? It's one of those places in Edmonton that everyone seems to have like a strong opinion on, but sorting fact from fiction can be a little tricky.
Yeah, you're totally right. McCauley's got a ton of history. The little Italy and Chinatown areas give it like a really unique feel. But yeah, its reputation for crime kind of overshadows everything else, and you want to like understand why.
Yeah, not just like stories or what people are saying. I want like the hard data. So we've got some pretty serious stuff lined up for this deep dive. Like we're talking crime statistics, actual police reports, and even some YouTube videos that go deep into like Edmonton's gang activity.
You know, it's kind of wild that even before we get to specific cases, the numbers themselves are like pretty alarming. McCauley's crime rates are way higher than average, like way higher than the national average, and even what we see across Edmonton.
How much higher? Like, give me the hard numbers.
Okay, so there's this crime report from 2020. It showed McCauley with a total crime rate that's like 124% above the national average. And we're not just talking about like stolen stuff either. Violent crime is a whole other story. It's 75% higher than the national average in McCauley.
Wow, that's unsettling. What's driving these crazy stats?
Well, the police reports point to a big problem with organized crime. Like, there are a lot of gangs operating in McCauley. We're talking about groups like the Crazy Dragons, the Indian Posse Red Alert, the Alberta Warriors, and even the White Boy Posse. Some of these names might sound familiar if you've been following crime news in Canada.
It's like all of Canada's most wanted are hanging out in this one neighborhood. That's seriously concerning. And it's not just like petty theft, right?
Definitely not. These groups are deep into drug trafficking and weapons trafficking. I even read a report about the police raiding these convenience stores in McCauley, and they found all these banned knives, butterfly knives, spring-assisted knives, even those like super scary trench knives. The number of weapons they took was insane.
Okay, that's pretty terrifying. It's not even just feeling unsafe, it's like actual weapons everywhere.
Exactly. And on top of that, there are reports of prostitution being pretty widespread in McCauley. And it's often linked to these gangs, which just makes things even more complicated.
So we've got organized crime, weapons everywhere, and exploitation all in one little area.
Yeah.
It's not looking good.
Is it all just about gangs, though? Like, are there other things going on, too?
For sure, organized crime is a huge factor, but it usually thrives in places where there are already bigger problems. Like McCauley also has really high rates of poverty and unemployment.
So you're saying that those problems make the neighborhood easier for criminals to take advantage of?
Yeah. When people are just struggling to survive, they're more likely to get involved in crime, either as the criminal or the victim.
Yeah.
We found some data that showed the average income in McCauley is way lower than the Canadian average, which just adds to the pressure.
And that leads to even more types of crime, right? Not just the gang stuff. Yeah, that's right. Police reports show a big increase in all sorts of crimes. In McCauley, stolen cars, theft, robberies, vandalism. It's a long list. And these crimes affect everyone living there, not just the people in gangs.
So things are looking pretty bad. What's the city doing about it? What about the police? Like, people must be worried about their safety and wanting solutions.
Totally valid question. There's definitely evidence of police action. We found a report from 2022 about a big drug and gun bust in a McCauley house where kids were living. They found a ton of fentanyl, meth, cocaine, 11 firearms, and a huge amount of cash. They're clearly trying to stop these criminal networks.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
But then you hear about those stores selling illegal knives, and it makes you wonder if that's enough to really fix the problem.
Yeah, that's a great point. It makes you think if just arresting people is enough. A single bust doesn't change the bigger problems of poverty and all that. That's where community organizations come in.
Okay, let's talk about what the community's doing. I know McCauley have a lot of people who want to make a difference. What kind of groups are working to make things better?
There's a lot of community pride in McCauley. We found groups like Safer McCauley. They're all about community safety projects. Then there's McCauley Revitalization. They're focused on like fixing up the area through economic and social development.
And don't forget, Boyle Street Ventures. They're doing amazing work, giving jobs to marginalized people and offering services like needle cleanup. They're out there making the neighborhood safer for everyone.
All these groups show how resilient and dedicated the people in McCauley are. They're actively working to make things better, even though it's tough.
It's inspiring to see that kind of commitment, even with all the challenges. But I imagine these groups have a tough job, right?
Oh, yeah. To really make a lasting impact, they need more help, more resources, and more support from the government and everyone else. It can't just be left to a few groups to fix such a big problem.
Absolutely. It's got to be a team effort to deal with all the issues in McCauley. So we've laid out the situation. We've got the hard data on crime rates, the gangs, the weapons, the poverty, the lack of jobs. It's all adding up.
It's a lot to process. But it's important to remember that McCauley isn't just about statistics. It's a community full of people who deserve to feel safe, to have opportunities, and to thrive.
That's a great point. And that's what we're trying to do with this deep dive, to explore every aspect of McCauley, the good, the bad, and the potential for change.
And ultimately what it all means for you, as someone who wants to understand this really important part of Edmonton.
So let's keep going. We've got a lot more to cover, including specific cases and stories that will really show you what McCauley is like.
I'm ready when you are. Let's dive back in.
Yeah.
Going through all this stuff, it really struck me how much McCauley's history is connected to its problems today.
That's interesting. We know it's a historic neighborhood, one of Edmonton's oldest.
Right.
It goes back to the early 1900s. What exactly stood out to you?
Well, the Edmonton Historical Board says that in the beginning, McCauley was like a really busy place. It was full of businesses and houses, and lots of immigrants moved there. They started businesses and built a strong community.
So it sounds like Little Italy and Chinatown go way back then.
Yeah, exactly. But then as Edmonton grew and things changed economically, McCauley kind of got left behind. Businesses moved out, new development happened elsewhere, and things started going downhill.
And I'm guessing that's a big reason for the problems they have now. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly. When the economy is bad, social problems follow poverty, unemployment, not having a stable place to live. It all creates an environment where crime can happen and people lose hope.
It's like a domino effect. People can't find jobs, they get desperate and turn to crime. Then the neighborhood gets a bad reputation and it's cut off from the rest of the city. It's a vicious cycle.
And that's exactly what we're seeing in McCauley, sadly. And it's important to remember, we're not just talking about numbers. This is about real people, families struggling with these problems.
Absolutely. But even with all that, the community isn't giving up. We found something in the Boyle-McCauley News about their efforts to deal with prostitution. It's a big problem in the area. Did you see that?
Oh, yeah. The report on Project Snug. It's a joint effort between the Edmonton Police and some social service agencies. They're trying to help women get out of prostitution.
So they're giving them things like food shelter detox programs, even long-term support to rebuild their lives. It sounds like something they really need.
Yeah, it is. A lot of these women are victims themselves. Many of them were sexually abused as kids. The report said that 90% of street prostitutes were assaulted when they were children.
Wow, that's awful. It just shows how important it is to be compassionate and understand the trauma that leads people to these situations.
For sure, we can't just arrest our way out of these problems. We have to invest in programs that address the root causes and help people heal and recover. We have to break the cycle.
That makes sense. Okay, switching gears a bit. One thing that people argue about a lot when it comes to McCauley is repeat offenders. We found this article in the Edmonton Journal that talks about it, and it's pretty shocking.
You mean the one about the rise in violent crime in 2022? Yeah, it shows that the justice system isn't really doing enough to prevent crime. The police looked at the data and found that a lot of violent crimes were committed by people who had already been arrested for violent crimes.
The numbers are crazy. They followed 2,880 people who were arrested for violent crimes in 2017 and then released. Over the next 2 years, those same people committed over 12,000 more crimes. That's like more than 4 crimes per person.
It's like a revolving door. Nobody wins, especially the people in McCauley who are the most affected by these crimes.
And this wasn't just a one-time thing. The police did the same analysis for 2020 and 2021. It was even worse. Out of 3,647 people arrested for violent crimes and released, 2,482 of them committed almost 20,000 more crimes. And that included 26 murders.
It's a wake-up call.
Yeah.
We need to fix the system, but we also need a justice system that holds people accountable, especially for violent crimes. We have to protect the community.
You know, it's becoming more and more clear that the situation in McCauley is super complicated. It's not just one problem, but a bunch of things all tangled together.
Exactly. There's no easy answer. We can't just send in a ton of police or expect community groups to fix everything by themselves. We need a plan that tackles poverty, addiction, housing, mental health, and make sure the justice system is actually working.
That's a big task. But what gives me hope is how strong the people in McCauley are. They're not giving up. They're organizing, advocating, working to create a better future for their neighborhood.
Totally agree. Their community spirit is inspiring. They're not waiting for someone to save them. They're taking charge and looking for solutions.
And they deserve our support. A better and safer McCauley is good for everyone in Edmonton.
That's right. It shows us that we all have a responsibility for community safety. We need to work together, listen to the people who are most affected, and find solutions that get to the root of the problem. We have to build a fairer and more just society.
You know, that brings up something really interesting. Safer McCauley had some information about crime prevention through environmental design, or CPTED. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, CPT'd. It's a cool idea. It's about using design and the environment to prevent crime, like making sure public spaces are well lit so there are no hiding spots, and using landscaping to create natural barriers.
So it's like designing the environment to discourage criminals and make it more welcoming for residents. I can see how that would be helpful in McCauley, especially with the drug use and property crime.
Exactly. It's not about making the neighborhood into a fortress. It's about using design to make it safer and more secure for everyone.
And I think there's some other tech solutions being used too.
Oh yeah, for sure. We saw something about security cameras and even predictive policing technology. That's where they try to predict where crime might happen. Of course, there are some ethical questions about privacy with that kind of technology.
That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
A really important one. But it's clear that technology is going to be more and more important in how we think about community safety.
Totally. We just have to make sure we use it responsibly and ethically so it helps everyone and doesn't create more inequality.
Couldn't agree more. So we've talked about the problems in McCauley, the efforts to fix them, the history, and the role of technology. But you're probably wondering, what's the conclusion? Is McCauley as dangerous as everyone says?
It's a tough question, and honestly, there's no easy answer. The data shows that McCauley has a higher crime rate than a lot of other parts of Edmonton, and those crimes can be serious violence, drugs, weapons.
So is it best to just avoid McCauley altogether?
Well, it's not that simple. Every neighborhood has good parts and bad parts. Most people in McCauley are just normal people trying to live their lives and make things better for themselves and their families.
So it's more about being informed and being smart, understanding the risks, taking precautions, and remembering that even in places with higher crime rates, there's more to the story than just the numbers.
Exactly. It's about seeing the whole picture, acknowledging the challenges, but also seeing the good things, the diversity, the history, the potential for positive change.
And it's about recognizing that safety doesn't just happen. We all have a role to play, whether it's supporting local groups, reporting suspicious activity, or just getting to know our neighbors. We can all help build stronger and safer communities.
I like that. And that's what makes this deck dive so interesting. It's not just about facts and figures. It's about encouraging us to think critically, to question our assumptions, and to ask ourselves, what can we do to make things better?
It's about being informed citizens, being active in our communities, and working towards a world where everyone feels safe and valued.
That's a great way to put it. And with that, I think we're ready for the last part where we'll look at some specific cases and stories that really show what life is like in McCauley.
Sounds good to me. Let's keep digging.
Yeah.
Looking at all these sources, it really makes you think about the people affected by all this. We talk about statistics and trends, but it's the individual stories that really show how tough things are in McCauley.
I know what you mean. The numbers can seem kind of distant, but behind every number, there's a real person with a life and a story. And some of those stories are really sad.
For sure. Like, we found a report about this couple who were charged with child endangerment. After the police raided their home in McCauley, they found drugs, guns, and tons of cash.
Yeah, that case from 2022 really shows how crime affects everyone, not just the people involved. It can be traumatic for whole families and the community.
It's so sad to think about the kids who are caught in the middle, living in those environments where they're exposed to danger and instability. It's really worrying.
It definitely is. And it shows that we need to do more than just arrest people. We need better community programs, education initiatives, and stricter rules to keep dangerous things out of the wrong hands. It's about creating a culture of safety and responsibility.
Talking about dangerous things, remember that other report about the police finding all those illegal knives at a convenience store in McCauley?
Oh yeah, that was crazy. It wasn't just a few knives. They found a ton of banned weapons. Butterfly knives, spring-assisted knives, even those scary trench knives.
It's kind of scary to think about how easy it is to get those weapons. They could end up with young people, vulnerable people, or anyone who might use them to hurt someone. It's a disturbing thought.
It is. And it shows why we need to fix the social and economic problems that lead to violence and crime. We need to give people opportunities, support, and hope for a better future.
Absolutely. And we can't ignore the gangs in McCauley either. We found this YouTube video that gave a really good overview of the different gangs in Edmonton. And it was pretty clear that McCauley is a major hub for some of the most dangerous ones.
Yeah, that video was really informative. It talked about gangs like the Crazy Dragons Red Alert, the Indian Posse, the White Boy Posse, all fighting for power in the neighborhood.
And it's not just about territory. These gangs are involved in all sorts of crimes: drug trafficking, prostitution, extortion, even violence against innocent people.
And they can be really brutal. Remember that report about the shooting at the gas station in Edmonton in 2023? That man and his 11-year-old son were killed in broad daylight. Apparently, it was revenge for a gang killing that happened in Toronto.
That story is just heartbreaking. To think about a child being caught in the middle of gang violence, it's terrifying. We need to do something to stop gangs and protect our kids. We need to give them better options than that kind of life.
It's a tough problem to solve, but we gotta try. We need programs that give young people alternatives to gangs, support people who want to leave gangs, and address the reasons why people join gangs in the first place. We have to break the cycle and give them hope.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into McCauley, I'm feeling kind of conflicted. I'm worried about the crime and violence, but I'm also impressed by how resilient and determined the community is.
I feel the same way. McCauley has been through so much, but it's also a place with a rich history, a vibrant culture, and a really strong community.
And those are the things we need to focus on. Supporting the community organizations that are working so hard to make McCauley safer and better, advocating for policies that address the root causes of crime and poverty, and believing in the power of hope and positive change.
I agree. A safer and more thriving McCauley is good for everyone in Edmonton.
Exactly. So as you keep learning about McCauley from the resources we've shared, we encourage you to think critically about everything you've heard. Challenge your assumptions, consider different perspectives, and ask yourself, what can I do to help build a safer and more just society?
That's a really important question because ultimately community safety is everyone's responsibility. It's up to all of us to create a world where everyone feels safe, valued, and empowered to be their best.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into McCauley. We hope this has made you curious and inspired you to learn more about this complex and fascinating part of our city.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep working towards a better future.